Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. First, let me define what I mean by mHealth or mobile health. This is really health promotion of all kinds that's supported by mobile devices. But I'll want to talk about what's the game changer here. Then I want to talk about two very well-validated behavior change mechanisms, self-monitoring and social support. And I want to ask this question. Are they really different? Is this really new wine when we use them in a digital ecology, or are they basically the same and we're just using a new delivery channel? And then I want to talk about what I think is the real potential here, which is the ability of these devices, the sensors that Santosh was just talking about, to detect changes in states of risk, which is going to allow us, I think, to do dynamic adaptive interventions. So what's the big deal about mobile? Well, it really has to do with the reach. And so when you ask the question, what about adherence? Well, in the US, 90% of us have mobile phones. The average is more than one mobile phone subscription per person. So we are quite adherent to carrying around these potential intervention delivery channels. Even in the developing world, in Africa, for example, where only 25% of homes have electricity and only 29% of roads are paved, it's 40%, no, it's actually 60% of the population that has a mobile phone. So this is reach, and even in the US, there's a reverse digital divide, that uptake of mobile phone technologies is greater in minority than majority populations. For those of us that had to learn to use these technologies, there was labor involved, but there's a whole new generation of digital natives that don't know anything else. They will find a landline a very strange object in the future. So what does mobile health offer us in terms of behavioral intervention delivery? As someone who was trained to do behavioral interventions like therapy, face-to-face in an office for a 50-minute hour, this is a real game changer. It really helps with access. I don't have to have somebody drive a distance, pay for parking, work at childcare. We don't have to worry about lack of local expertise. If somebody is carrying a mobile device, they're carrying the intervention tools that they need with them. It's portable. They can access these tools on demand when needed, and all of the channels are present. It's not just a phone. It's the internet. It's your whole social network. It's a map. It's a coach. It's all in one, and you're carrying it with you. But again, I think the real breakthroughs will come from having this big data that is available, continuous, temporally dense, contextually aware, to give feedback to people and to detect changes in state that will allow us to intervene, not burdensomely all the time, but when needed. So what do we have? What are some of these technologies? You're familiar with many, many of these. The ones up in your left-hand upper corner are mostly the ones that appeared first for tracking physical activity. Fitbit was first, Actigraph was the gold standard, now finally has a wireless capability, and then you have something like the Apple Watch that has all of these capabilities and more, and it's on body, you wear it. Down below is some of the first generation of in-body sensors. These are really cool technologies where they're being used mostly for detecting medication adherence. Pills are prepared with a sensor on them. When you ingest these pills, a signal is sent to the sensor in a Band-Aid. And so your mobile phone, your doc's mobile phone, your family's mobile phone get a signal saying that you've taken your meds. Talk about some of the strange downsides. I actually have one of these devices. There are a couple of pharmaceutical companies working in this space now, and I can't wear it because I keep going through airports, and they would be finding metal in me if I were consuming these placebos and wearing this sensor. So these are some of the things we'll have to work through. The most challenging behavior for behavior change, I think, smoking is a tough one, but obesity is a more prevalent one. And so all of these devices up in the upper right-hand corner are things we've tried to use to help people change eating as well as physical activity. Mostly, we're working still with apps on a smartphone that require you to enter everything. We do have one objective measure, the wireless scale. We have some sort of wild things. We have the tooth sensor, and we have what I think we are all hoping will be the next breakthrough, the objective sensor that will detect energy absorption or energy intake so that people won't have to work at it so burdensomely. Okay. Why are these technologies important? Well, it really has to do with what we think about how to change behavior. Mostly are models of health risk behaviors, by which I'm talking about physical inactivity, poor quality diet, sexual risk behaviors, smoking. Mostly, to self-regulate these things, we have to know two things. We have to know what's our current state and where are we supposed to be, what's our goal. And we have to have the ability to detect that discrepancy and to close it. This is a control systems engineering model, and it's pretty straightforward. Whoops. Oh, It works really well when you've got physical objects, like if you're talking about changing a flat tire, you know what it looks like when it's flat. You know what it's supposed to look like, what the goal is like. That's pretty straightforward. But now what happens, this is very sensitive. Okay, now what happens when we add a more typical challenge for us? Your goal is a 500-calorie lunch, but does the hamburger you're contemplating eating map onto it? This is harder for most of us. We need some help, and so apps have developed to offer that help. When we talk about models of how we design interventions to change behaviors, mostly we have a tremendous amount of faith in self-monitoring adherence. If we work backwards in these models, whether we're talking about smoking cessation, weight loss, increasing physical activity, basically we think the behavioral risk factors are, they're either low-rate behaviors like moderate vigorous physical activity that you're not doing enough of, or high-rate risk behaviors that you're doing too much of, like eating too many high-fat foods. And we think that if you will just track them and adhere to self-monitoring them and go through this control systems model, you'll fix the problem. Everything will be good. And so we design apps, we've been designing apps for a while, that work on these problems. And here you see a couple of generations of ones that we developed, one for multiple risk behaviors and one for obesity. And you will see our well-established behavior change techniques. Goal setting, so up on the top there, the person has a goal of eating 5 fruits and vegetables. They see the goal, they're entering what they're eating, so they're self-monitoring, they're getting feedback on how they're doing. On the bottom, this is the diabetes prevention protocol on an app. They've got a calorie goal and a fat gram goal and physical activity goal. They're entering their information, wearing an accelerometer that's Bluetoothing. And so it's basically a technological way of helping them engage in these behavior changes. Sometimes we use incentives. We always use social support. The data are transmitted to somebody who's paying attention. And I'm going to show you quickly some data from 2 trials that show that these kinds of devices work very well. This is the old wine. This is old behavior change knowledge. These are data from a study that we did with people who had multiple risk behaviors, very common ones. They didn't eat enough fruits and vegetables, they ate too much saturated fat, didn't get enough moderate vigorous physical activity, and they watched more than 2 hours of TV a day. We made the assumption that it was going to be too much for them to change all 4 things at once. What we wanted to know was, which 2 could we get them to change? One diet, one eating, one activity, that might bring along other habits, other healthy changes and other habits. It was hard to know what to predict. We thought, well, maybe it will be the traditional diet, cut down fat, increase physical activity, because most of us have some experience with that. So maybe it will leave some spare capacity. But really the one we were banking on was increased fruits and vegetables cut down screen time because we thought the fiber would help to crowd out the fat, and if you cut down on your screen time, you have to do something more active. So what we did was that we paid people to, we paid them $175 to achieve these behavioral goals, and they had to do it really quickly. They had to get halfway there in the first week, then the rest of the way there in the second and third weeks, and maintain it for that amount of time. Meanwhile, they're uploading data daily and we're tracking them. First thing that was shocking to us was everybody, with the exception of one woman, was able to do it. No problem. Most of them did it within a couple of days. Really wasn't a challenge. Then we said, well, we're not going to pay you to make these behavior changes any longer, but what you do need to do is send us 3 days of data every month for the next 6 months, just so we can follow up with you. And this surprised us as well, that people didn't immediately stop doing these behaviors. They fell off some, but they maintained some substantial changes. This is a 1 standard deviation change, large effect in our best group, and a half standard deviation change in our other groups. So very nice maintenance, particularly for the group that increased fruits and veg and cut down sedentary. In fact, the traditional diet group in red was the worst group. This is what the actual data look like. What you can see is we had pretty nice changes. People went from about 1 fruit or veg up to 5.5. Then when we stopped paying them to do that, they dropped off, but they stayed at 3, which is a tripling compared to baseline, pretty good. They started at about 3.5 of TV, went up to about, I think it's about 1.5 hours, stopped at 2 hours, and we did get a freebie. In terms of saturated fat coming along for the ride, predicted by not only their fruit and veg intake, but also when they cut down their screen time, it stops the hand-to-mouth pairing. But there was another surprising thing in this data set. Now you would think, remember, we know that these people are doing these behaviors. We're paying them, we're tracking them. We looked at their self-efficacy for the behaviors. And sure enough, the people who did our increased fruits, veg, cut down sedentary, showed an increase in self-efficacy for those behaviors. You see the nice rise for the green lines. And there's even a rise for improving sat fat, even though they're not trying to change it. But now look what happens for the traditional diet, the red lines. Now remember, they are making these changes. They are cutting down their sat fat. They're increasing their physical activity. So you'd think they would feel confident about that. Not so. No increase in self-efficacy for those behaviors, and a significant decrease for sedentary and for screen time. Something undermining about this. Interesting. Well, you know, we sort of tucked that away, thought it might be an anomaly, but it was interesting. We have just finished a new trial in which we now were trying to see if we could scale this treatment to lead to maintenance of healthy lifestyle change. We knew at the end of the first study that we could get an increased fruit and veg, a cut down in screen time, and reduction in fat just by changing 2 behaviors. The one we couldn't get without targeting it was physical activity. So what we wanted to know in this study was, should we target that simultaneously, or should we get the easy behaviors under control and then target it, do it sequentially? And we had a control condition that dealt with stress management and sleep. Here you can see our very lovely apps that we designed to help people do this. When they enter in that they've eaten a fruit or veg, they get this nice little apple that drops into their apple bucket. When they've gotten some ModVig physical activity, their odometer lights up. When they've exceeded their TV watching time, their scale drops and the TV screen cracks. So these are engaging. And in fact, we get huge levels of self-monitoring. For some of the behaviors in our trials now for self-weighing, over 6 months, we get more than 90% of days self-monitored. So these are reinforcing in a way we've never seen when people were doing this on paper and pencil. We've just analyzed these data. We have big improvements out to 9 months in all of these behaviors. But what I wanted to show you is, again, the self-efficacy data. So remember, big improvements in all of them, out to 9 months. But you see improvements in self-efficacy for fruits and veg and for sedentary, but not so much for saturated fat and mod-vig, even though they're improving them. Something's different here about how empowering self-monitoring these behaviors is. So again, I thought, all right, this is now the second time I've seen this, but maybe it's just us. These are data from a study that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in November, in which the interventionists in a primary care setting either treated people for weight loss with usual care, they told them to go lose weight, or they asked them to use MyFitnessPal, which is a good diet and physical activity tracker. What happened was, after 6 months, there was minimal weight change, no difference between the intervention and control group. Too bad, not terribly surprising. But look at this. Remember, nobody is losing weight here, but the group that is not getting the self-tracking is increasing its self-efficacy. The group that is doing its self-tracking and not losing weight is declining in its self-efficacy. And there's the predictable effect on dropout. So there's heightened dropout in the group that's doing the tracking. So what I take from that is that self-monitoring, that self-monitoring of all behaviors is not equal. All these behaviors are not equally empowering. I don't know whether this has something to do with the fact that we're in a digital environment or that we just have never been able to get people to self-monitor to this level because it was so horrible. Now that we've made it, the feedback has made it rewarding, we're able to see some of these discrepancies. But I'm pretty sure that if we want people to maintain self-monitoring for weight loss despite this disempowering of efficacy, we're going to need some support from multi-level interventions. Here's how I tend to think about this. What we mostly have focused on in our behavioral interventions is interventions targeted at the individual, and I think this has been part of the reason that we're so good at initiating change. An individual can do that, but if we want maintenance, we have to go to the sociocultural context or to environment and policy to make the defaults the healthy ones and the easier ones. We need that kind of support. Here was a study in which we did this. We rolled out a technology in a VA that was using group weight loss treatments. This was a pretty old, an older population, late 50s, early 60s, not technology savvy, and they all were getting the same VA-delivered weight loss treatment. All that varied was whether they were recording on paper and pencil or using an app. And what we saw was, indeed, the people who were just recording on paper and pencil and going to the groups didn't lose any weight. They're the red line. The people who had the technology lost about 10 pounds and maintained it for a year. So the technology plus the sociocultural support in the environment really worked well. This is what I actually find even more interesting. We broke the data based on what proportion of the group treatments people had gone to. Dotted line, they went to less than 80%. Solid line, they went to more than 80%. What you see is, sadly, the red lines didn't matter if they went to 80% of the groups or not. They didn't lose any weight. But look at the blue line, dotted line. Even if they had the technology and they didn't go to the groups, so they didn't get the sociocultural support, they didn't lose any weight. But look what happens if they've got the technology and they're going to the groups. Here is the support for the multi-level intervention. These folks lose 15 pounds and keep it off. So how about, this is self-monitoring, the cornerstone of behavior change interventions. What about social support, another cornerstone? So I'm asking the question here, in our VA study we can deliver social support, but we have all these access barrier issues. People still have to come, they have to pay for parking. Could we deliver the social support virtually? Well, of course we could. Facebook does it all the time. But can we do it in behavior change interventions? We tried to do this in a recent study where we treated people in groups, and they met 8 times in a group, but we wanted to extend their ability to support each other. So we enrolled them in a chat group, and we gave them information about how their group members were doing in terms of their self-monitoring adherence. So what you're seeing here is in the middle column, this is showing how many of their meals they've recorded. It starts out red before they've recorded any, goes yellow when they've recorded 1, goes green when they've recorded 3, and the same kind of thing for accelerometer wear. Some groups really got into this. They tried to turn the whole board green, really worked nicely. However, at the end of the day, I would have to say it was a bust. It turned out to be very challenging. These were groups of 8. Seemed like it worked really well for about half of them, not so well for the other half. Half behaved like we hoped. They said, oh, gee, it was great. I wanted to know how my team members were doing so I could reach out and support them. It helped me push myself on forward. But other people said, you know, I really didn't like these people. I didn't want to socialize with them. I didn't want to be on a chat group with them. And the people who were responding often then felt rejected because they were the only person contributing. So we thought, okay, these groups are obviously too small. We need to go larger. So we went larger. We went to 27,000 people that we got from a database from an online weight loss network. And we analyzed the social networks, the social connectedness, and how they related to weight loss. We saw, once again, the problem of people not wanting to engage. Fully 89% of these people, these 27,000 people with 2 weight loss, 2 weigh-ins, didn't make any friends in the site. 89%. If they did, it really helped them to stay around. The distribution of how long people stay in one of these online weight loss sites is bimodal. About half of the people come one time and never come back. About another half people stay for quite a long time. If you make even 1 friend, your odds are about 90% of staying around for 6 months. So it's hugely helpful. It also is helpful in terms of weight loss. This is the dose response, linking the number of friends you have and the amount of weight you lose, and particularly if you're connected to connector hubs. It really helps. But our challenge is, this is not a randomized experiment. People assign themselves to this experiment. How can we get people who are not very extroverted to reach out and befriend somebody else? Or alternatively, can we grow these connector hubs who are the folks who welcome people into the group and introduce them so they form these connections or facilitate them? Or what we're trying now is, you know, given the way that Facebook works, it counts on the fact that you already bring your pre-established friends, and that's your network. Can we train people in the network to be more supportive? This is something we're experimenting with now. So what I've talked about so far are traditional static interventions. We can do them anytime. There is no right place. They were not specifically designed to fit the context, the ecology, the timing, the tempo of the person's life. And if we tailor, we have focused on tailoring for stable individual differences. Which intervention for which person? This is where we're now moving. So this is a wonderful deja vu for me. This was actually a publication based on my dissertation, which was done a few years ago. And we were concerned with measuring the individual differences in vulnerability so we could mark them and tailor treatment. And pretty straightforwardly, what we were looking at was the fact that if somebody had a very high vulnerability, didn't take much stress to trip them into an episode of schizophrenia. If they had a low level of vulnerability, it took a whole lot. We could mark these vulnerabilities and predict what it was going to take to make you psychotic. You know, I thought that was pretty interesting, but it didn't really excite me because what I wanted to go after was the things that predicted the emergent state of vulnerability. I wanted to know, I didn't want to have somebody on neuroleptics for their whole life that would give them terrible permanent side effects. I wanted to know, when are they really at risk, so we need to intervene. And at that time, we had no ability to detect changes in state. Now we do, thanks to Santosh and MD2K. And so this is the model that formed the theoretical basis for Santosh's MD2K project. He's mentioned that we're trying to predict when people are at risk for relapse to congestive heart failure and to smoking. And so the question in smoking, clinically what happens is once people have a slip after quitting, they're very likely to go back, but we can't get them to tell us when that slip is going to happen. So that's the S5 point there, that first slip. We don't want them to get there. We want to be able to detect when S3 happens, when the risk is rising, so we can intervene. And that's what we're trying to do, is to find markers that will predict these risk states. The one that we're focusing on is stress. And here are some made-up data for how this works. We can detect when smoking happens. We can detect the level of stress. And so what we're doing now is detecting these levels of stress and micro-randomizing to intervention or no intervention. What we emerge with at the end of the day is an evidence-based set of decision rules that tells us this is the time to intervene. Because it might be, for example, that you need to intervene when somebody's stressed, but it might be that they're just too far gone at that point. They can't process. So maybe they need to be moderately stressed or maybe not stressed at all. That's what we'll know by the end of this experimentation. So just to conclude, I would suggest that these ubiquitous carried on-body, in-body mobile technologies are going to be a real game changer in terms of delivering behavioral intervention. I think they reinforce self-monitoring to a level we've never seen by providing instantaneous feedback. They really now let us see that they build self-efficacy more easily for some easy behaviors like fruits and vegetables and sedentary time than for these more restrictive behaviors like cutting down fat or calories and these hard exercise behaviors. Something different is going on there. If we want those latter behaviors, I think it's crucial that we augment with our multi-level interventions based on environment policy or sociocultural factors. I think offering social support digitally definitely increases scalability compared to having somebody have to drive to an office to get their support. But and the engagement really improves the outcomes, but it's challenging. This is a tough one to arrange. And I think this ability to sense states that predict adverse health events and make it possible to experiment and develop an evidence-based decision rule, I think this is the future. It's going to tell us not only with whom and how to intervene, but when and where. I wouldn't do any of this without the generous support of the NIH and my wonderful team who does it all. Thank you.